Communists using your values against you. We'll talk about that and what the angle is. Steve Deace joins us. All kinds of wonderful stuff tonight on I'm Right. Okay, so before we get to the rest of our wonderful show, Steve Deace is here, so many other great things. I need to talk about something that happens all the time. And this is not something that will help you and me in the present. It'll help us for every single day we care about politics and culture and the future of our country. We're going to talk about the tactics the enemy uses and why. First of all, let's discuss this. I don't know what your beliefs are. It's not my business. It's your business. But I am about to tell you what a central belief of the communist is. A central belief of the communists, since communism began, is that the church is the enemy. The church is the enemy. People who believe in God, people who believe in Jesus, people who read the Bible and believe in its words, the communist considers those people to be mortal enemies. And why? Because they serve a higher power than he can control or censor or kill. And the communist needs to take the place of God to do all the things he wants to do. Why, when the Bolsheviks took over the Soviet Union, why were they killing the priests, burying them alive, torturing them, tearing down the churches? Why? Same thing, Cambodia, East Germany, China, the Spanish communists raping the nuns, murdering the priests. Why over and over again? In Romania, Pest prison, the worst place in the history of the world, according to Solzhenitsyn. Who were those poor souls being tortured to death over and over and over again in Pest prison? Do you know who they were? They were the Christians who would not convert to communism. Communists view the church as a huge firewall against what they want to do. So they're always against it, always trying to get after it. But here's the problem. Good people, like in Spain, maybe you, they recognize an open attack, a naked attack. You start burying a priest alive. That tends to wake the church up, and the church all of a sudden gets involved. So the communists needed to find a better way. And a better way was this. Instead of going up against the church, infiltrate the church. Take the church itself. Take over the religious institutions. And then, instead of raping the nuns, just kind of subvert the gospel and take those people who are sitting there in the pews, take them and just kind of give them an off-ramp to communism. So that, you have to understand, has always been a communist agenda. And another thing you have to understand before we get to the comments made by Kentucky's governor and others, another thing you have to understand is this. The Democrat Party of even 1980, 1990, is nothing at all like the modern Communist Party today. Absolutely nothing. And you don't have to take my word on that. Go look at their stances on issues. Go down the list. From immigration to gay marriage to this Democrat Party in 2026, we almost shouldn't even call them that because they bear no resemblance to what it used to be. Now, that's a problem if you're a Democrat politician telling your base that children should cut their penises off. Wait, what? Why is that a problem? Because the Democrats of today, who want to get elected today and stay elected today, they need older, normal Democrat guy to not get too freaked out, and they need him to keep voting Democrat. You know, he's been a Democrat his whole life. He hates Republicans, but he's a union guy, works with his hands. Or the guys decide, older lady, she's a Democrat, her mom is a Democrat. She doesn't like Republicans, of course, but she's in church every Sunday. She sits in those pews. And how in the world could you open up the Bible and see the things the Bible says about children, protecting them, about, I mean, homosexuality. It's all laid out right there. How could you read those words if you're a Democrat? You sit in those pews, you read those words, and then you go vote for the party that pushes that? What that lady needs, the communist knows this, what that lady needs, what that old union guy needs, he needs permission. He needs somebody to give his conscience permission to go vote Democrat so he doesn't feel evil or weird. He needs that permission. And communists like Andy Bashir know this. That's why they sit down, and when they're asked about, honestly, child trans stuff, I think it's some of the most demonic stuff I've ever heard of in my life. It is on par with anything ISIS ever did. To take a child, a confused child, and to use his parents and his teachers and psychiatrists and medical institutions to twist his mind, and then to use medical instruments to destroy his body, is on par with the worst evils in the history of mankind. So if you're a governor of Kentucky, a Democrat, and you want to sell that to that little old lady in the pew, here's how you do it.
But we rarely talk about the why. People want to know what drives us, especially in a world with social media where everyone's looking for the next authentic thing. For me, that's my faith. Most of the decisions I make are based on that golden rule that says we love our neighbor as ourselves, and that parable of the Good Samaritan that says everyone is our neighbor. And so when I've taken actions like vetoing the nastiest piece of anti-LGBTQ legislation that ever came through my state, I described it in those terms. I said, my faith teaches me that all children are children of God. And I didn't want people picking on those kids.
Isn't that so masterful? That little old lady sitting in that church pew wasn't quite sure how she felt about all of it, but man, you know what? That does sound like Jesus. Praise the Lord! Vote Democrat! It's what they do. It's really, look, I really shouldn't make light of it, because it is the deepest, darkest evil to take somebody's faith and twist it for the devil's purposes. But that's what the devil does. Remember, as the Bible says, the devil knows Scripture quite well. He knows it better than you do. You know that? Knows it much better than me. The devil knows Scripture, and he will quote it to you. Now, if you're a Democrat, you're sitting in that pew. You can read the Bible. You know what the Bible says about children. Jesus himself talking about, don't harm these children. Don't you dare harm these children. We have books, Psalms, talking about, I knew you in your mother's womb. It's impossible to read the words of the Bible and think it's okay to kill an unborn baby. You don't need a Democrat or a Republican or me to tell you, if you read that, if you believe the words that are in the Bible, it's impossible to think that that's okay. So, if you're a Democrat running in the state of Texas, James Tallarico wants to be the Democrat senator of Texas. Very difficult. James Tallarico understands that if he's ever going to win as a Democrat in the red state of Texas, he needs people in those pews. He needs their conscience to allow them to vote for him. But he's a demon who loves abortion. He'll drive you to the abortion clinic himself if he could. How to do that, what to do. He went on Joe Rogan. Here's what he did.
But I say all this in terms of, in context of abortion, because before God comes over Mary and we have the incarnation, God asks for Mary's consent, which is remarkable. I mean, go back and read this in Luke. I mean, the angel comes down and asks Mary if this is something she wants to do. And she says, if it is God's will, let it be done. Let it be. Let it happen. So to me, that is an affirmation in one of our most central stories that creation has to be done with consent. You cannot force someone to create. Creation is one of the most sacred acts that we engage in as human beings. But that has to be done with consent. It has to be done with freedom. And to me, that is absolutely consistent with the ministry and life and death of Jesus. And so that's how I come down on that side of the issue.
What a brilliant lie, isn't it? If you have to be honest, let's give the devil credit where it's due. Very clever. Very, very clever. What a convincing argument. Hey, it's what Jesus would want. Very evil, but very clever. And it was done on purpose. And remember, I talked in the opening about the communists destroying the churches and the pastors in the Soviet Union when they took over. But here's the thing. They didn't destroy all of them. They knew they couldn't destroy all of them because the people, it was such an Orthodox Christian society, the people would demand some. I'd have to be able to attend service somewhere. So, well, you find the pastors who are weak, demonic, pathetic. You find the pastors, if you're a communist, you can co-opt the ones who will work for you on Sunday instead of the good Lord. Did you think that communist tactic stopped in the Soviet Union? Oh man, you're mistaken.
If Jesus were here today, he would be a clinic escort, distracting women from the hatred of the protesters, or an abortion doula, holding women's hands and offering support and love as they end their pregnancies. If Jesus were giving his sermon today, he might also have said, "Blessed are those who end pregnancies, for they will be known for their loving kindness." I have been pregnant 4 times. I have had 2 abortions, and I have 2 amazing children.
Deeply evil. But you see, devil's been using those tactics since long before communism. The communists, because communism is of the devil, adopted those tactics. They've been employing them for 100 years now, and they are well at work employing them in America today. They view the church as the enemy. Never forget that. They view the church as the enemy, and they're trying to give Democrats permission in their minds to continue to vote for these monsters. All that may have made you uncomfortable, but I am right. The wonderful Steve Deace joins us in just a moment to discuss this and many other things. Now, I want your mind to be ready for the war that we're in. And that's what Chalk is really about. I know you're probably thinking, well, it's natural herbal supplements. Well, that's about your mind more than anything else. It's about your mood and your mind. I don't want you down. I don't want you foggy, your brain foggy. Is your brain foggier now? I forgot. Senior moment. You ever say those words? Why don't you try a male vitality stack from Chop or a female vitality stack, and your energy will just go up, 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 up. Natural energy, not that jittery, palm sweaty energy. Your energy goes up, and the fog in your mind lifts. Go find out what I'm talking about. Get a subscription. I've been on one 4 years. I've never felt better. I feel like I'm 20 again. Chuck.com/JesseTV. We'll be back.
Come on, Public Enemy. I came to tell white supremacists. I came to tell MAGA. I came to tell white privilege. We coming, we coming, we coming. We coming, we coming. God said, when you give me glory, I'm going to run them out of the State Department. If you give me glory, I'm going to run them out of Congress and run them out of Senate. If you give me glory, I'm going to run them off of your job and run them off of your classroom. I need you to take your neighbor's hand and say, neighbor, we got to shout like we got faith.
Sorry. I didn't mean to burst out laughing in the middle of that. I mean, this is so stupid. Who sits and listens to that? It's so stupid. Joining me now, my buddy Steve Deace, host of the Steve Deace Show. Give me glory, Steve. It's so freaking dumb.
I thought I was watching Coming to America and the Eddie Murphy Reverend character there for a minute. Let your soul glow, Jesse. Let your soul glow. All right. Yes.
All right. I don't mean we shouldn't. I tried to do this in the open, We shouldn't make light of things like this, even though all you can do is laugh sometimes. It is a disgusting perversion of the gospel to use the pulpit like that. It's really gross. It happens all over the country in various kinds of churches. It's gross, and man, hell's going to be warm for some people.
Yeah, well, I mean, listen, it's demonic levels of retardation is what it is. And what's happening there is very cultic, very demonic. Race, as we understand it in our modern notions, just does not exist as any kind of societal construct in the scriptures at all. And so this entire thing is a fallacy. But and this is satirical levels of a very real manifestation that we go up against absolutely every single day in our culture. And this all stems really, and they're getting away with this because the church for the last generation, Jesse, has been more interested in being nicer than God. Mike Pence's convent of the Sisters of the Perpetual Furrowed Brows, sweater vested, khaki or pleated khaki, Hawaiian shirt wearing Christianity. And so something was going to fill that void, and what you just showed was an example therein, and that's why you've seen MAGA kind of step into the void filled by the church. And right now we're in a culture where the beta male guy married to the cul-de-sac Karen at your suburban megachurch is way less likely, who may have given his life to Jesus once. He is, though, way less likely to show up at the public library across the street where they're soul raping the kids with Drag Queen Storytime Hour than some MAGA guy who thinks the F-bomb is a conjunction in a sentence and has a tatted up sleeve, and thinks Budweiser's a food group. He's way more likely to show up at the school board to protest that than the guy in your church. And that's fine for now because we need the armies that we have, but that's not sustainable as a culture. We eventually have got to wake the church up and get it out ahead of MAGA to sustain this as a movement.
Amen. All right, Steve, there's too much to get to. I know Pam Bondi is one of those things that make people's heads pop off, myself included. Steve, I'm just going to hand you the show. Go ahead.
If you were auditioning to be a cable news contributor, then her testimony on Wednesday was phenomenal. But that's not her job. And to pivot off of what her job is as the head of the Justice Department, is to go after crime and corruption in America, to defend the American people against crime and corruption. And for her to pivot off of that to, well, look at the NASDAQ, look at the stock market, was embarrassing. And frankly, beneath the dignity of her office. And she's just been a disappointment from the beginning. The stunt that she tried to pull, the binders with some of our most important influencers on our side, that she basically just coerced into turning themselves into, self-parodies and risking their credibility when these people do some very important work in getting our message out to our people, exposing things like the Libs for TikTok gal who's exposed more evil in America the last few years than she has. So this thing has been a point of diminishing returns almost from the moment she took it. And what's funny is that this is a Democrat trail of tears. 90%, with the exception for every Howard Lutnick, there's 100 Democrats or their associates getting dragged right now through the Epstein files disclosure. We are taking on political, liability on this on our side, Jesse, for literally no ROI at all. For absolutely nothing. The administration wants to get rid of Thomas Massie. I understand they want a more loyal person in his seat. I get that. Well, now you've just given Massie an issue for the last few months to get to your right and make himself more valuable to his constituents than he previously was, which is this Epstein issue. This entire thing has just been mishandled from day one. And it's one of the things that if you're there are three groups of people that put us over the top in the last election: Hispanic men, the Maha crowd, and young men. We tied with young men, the best showing with young men in over 20 years. Well, those young men are the ones listening to Sean Ryan and Joe Rogan and Theo Vaughn, Andrew Schultz. Trump was on those shows and was amazing on those shows. And they thought, hey, the guy that got shot in the face, he's going to be the one that's going to expose all this evil. And instead, he's just been fighting us on this to some varying degree for the last 7 or 8 months now. And we are allowing something that should be an albatross around about 90% of it should be an albatross around Democrats, and we are absorbing this as a political expense on our own side. And frankly, Jesse, it just makes no sense to me at all.
It doesn't make sense to me. Look, one final thing that doesn't make sense to me. I've only got about a minute here. Maria Salazar is a piece of trash Republican from Florida trying to pass amnesty, and she, of course, gets the Trump endorsement yesterday. I'm so tired of this, Steve. 10 years of Donald Trump endorsing the worst pieces of crap, making it impossible to reform the party that fights him. The party fights him, and he endorses all these losers. I don't even know what to say. I'm so exasperated by this whole thing.
Straight up, I have a list of things when I get to heaven I'm going to ask Jesus about it. I'm not even kidding. This is not even a joke. And on my list is, why did Donald Trump spend 10 years endorsing many of the same Republicans who, if they thought there was no accountability at all, would vote for him to be impeached and were quietly probably hoping that shot doesn't miss by about 10 inches, maybe a little bit closer to his forehead? I don't know the answer to that. I can't even speculate. The whole thing is so foreign to me. I don't understand. And that's an answer that requires forces beyond my level of comprehension. It makes no sense to me at all.
Steve, my brother, as always, I appreciate you. You know what else I appreciate? Companies that actually help small businesses. All these big corporations, they all just work together. And of course, big corporations, you know what they fear the most? It's not each other, because they all work together. They fear small businesses. Small businesses can't get money. They can't get capital. You have a small business? You need capital? Well, the large banks, the big banks, they only work with, of course, the big companies. What do they tell you? We're busy, call back tomorrow. No habla inglés. Not Cardiff. Cardiff is here for small businesses. Same day. I remember watching my parents run a small business. Sometimes you got to have capital. You got to have it now. Up to 500 grand, same day. Cardiff is here for the normal people, the local business, the small business. Go find out what they can and will do for you. Love me some companies that focus on small business. Cardiff.co/Jesse. We'll be back. You know what's wild about all this Somali fraud stuff going on in the United States of America? If I asked you, or 10 people on the road, about Somali fraud, you might think about Minnesota, and understandably so, but there's a state way up there in the Northeast that always gets forgotten about. Wonderful lobster, I should note. Maine. And for some reason, Maine is full of this crap. And you don't know about it, do you? Well, Steve Robinson does. Joining me now, investigative reporter with the Maine Wire, Steve Robinson. Steve, tell me about Maine. What you got going on up there?
Well, I know too much about Somali welfare fraud, actually, Jesse, because we're apparently the only organization that can do investigative journalism around it in this state. We reported last year exclusively on a company called Gateway Community Services. Gateway was really a poster child for the Somali American dream, the Somali American refugee experience, which is celebrated here in Maine by the left-wing newspapers and Democratic politicians. It was founded by a guy named Abdullahi Ali, who is currently on the lam in Kenya, has yet to return to the United States after our reporting has come out. I don't think he's going to return to the United States, by the way, because he's smart enough to know that there's probably going to be an FBI agent waiting for him. What we reported on was a series of notices of violation that we obtained from the Department of Health and Human Services that showed that this company had overbilled Medicaid, known here as MaineCare, by over $1 million. This was covered up, swept under the rug by the Mills administration. They were allowed to repay this debt by taking deductions from their future billing, but they couldn't substantiate tons of the money that they were billing to MaineCare. And as we dug further, we found that Gateway was really just the nexus for an elaborate system where Somalis and other asylum seekers, other refugees, were ripping off MaineCare. It was like the cash register had just been left open, as Dr. Oz put it in a video yesterday, 2 days ago, and the people were just helping themselves to money out of the back pockets of Mainers. I mean, we're looking at hundreds of millions of dollars in Medicaid fraud in Maine since 2018, when, by the way, we experienced the full blessing of unlimited open borders. There was not just the Somali diaspora that's accumulated in Maine since roughly year 2000, but there was also a large wave of Central African migration from Angola, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and Rwanda that began arriving in Maine starting in 2018. And they have assimilated very well to Maine care, not so well to speaking English or following the laws or our driving laws. But they've definitely learned the rules of the Maine Care program, which seem to be send an invoice to the Department of Health and Human Services and it will get paid. And if you're too obnoxious with your fraud, you might get audited and maybe they'll turn off the money if there's some national media attention. But by and large, no one gets in trouble, especially, Jesse, if you're helping Democrats win elections here.
Let's talk about that, because you mentioned the cash register being left open. That doesn't sound like the kind of thing that happens by accident. And with all due respect to the people of the Congo, I do not believe they can come to America and figure out themselves how to steal from the taxpayer. Who's helping these people in elected office?
So the Gateway is actually an interesting case because it's very much a political animal. Abdullahi Ali has been photographed with Governor Janet Mills, the Secretary of State Shenna Bellows, the who's who of Democrat politicians in this state. And coincidentally, Gateway also benefited from no-bid contracts, over $1 million worth of no-bid contracts from the Mills administration. And here's the neat trick that they pulled in 2022. Using federal COVID dollars provided to them under the CARES Act by President Joe Biden, they funded so-called community health outreach workers. These were CHOWs, was the lingo for them. This was money given to Gateway Community Services and other left-wing migrant NGOs. And on the surface, what they were supposed to do as CHOWs is go into migrant communities and register them for Medicaid, register them for food stamps. And they were also allowed, in the terms of the contract stipulate, they were allowed to buy household supplies from migrant houses. So that's walking around money, effectively. Under a federal law that's been on the books for over 2 decades, if you help enroll somebody in Medicaid or the Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program, you are required to provide them assistance registering to vote. So any program like the CHOWs that is enrolling people in Medicaid is a de facto voter registration drive. So the Mills administration, using a no-bid contract, fed money to a Somali-run migrant agency now accused of Medicaid fraud in order for them to go out into the migrant community and register voters. At the same time, Jesse, that they were doing this under a no-bid contract, out of the same offices in Lewiston and Portland, the same exact offices that Gateway uses in Lewiston and Portland, former Gateway employees formed the Community Organizing Alliance, which was an explicitly political organization affiliated with the Maine People's Alliance, which is our Arabella Advisors dark money group, kind of a union, George Soros front catch-all to help elect Democrats. So at the same time, we're pumping Medicaid money, no-bid contract money into Gateway Community Services. They form an explicitly political group aimed at registering migrants to vote. And we have a Secretary of State, by the way, who just this year, or I guess it was last year now, went on Mark Elias's podcast and admitted that non-citizens are registered to vote in Maine. I mean, what does that add up like to you, Jesse?
Good God. All right, Steve, before I let you go, I have to ask. I can't wait to have you back. I'd have you on for a long time. Susan Collins, obviously not a big fan, but that's probably as good as you're going to get in Maine. She's running against some nutball, apparently with Nazi tattoos, Graham Plantner, or whatever his stupid name is. But who's going to win this thing?
So Graham Plattner is actually in a Democratic primary with the governor, Janet Mills. I mean, this is a toss-up. Graham Plattner has the Nazi tattoo that he put the mutant dog over the top of to cover up, and progressives seem to be okay with that. Plattner has actually formerly worked with the Socialist Rifle Association, teaching them how to take, sniper shots from a prone position at human-shaped targets. But on the other hand, you have Governor Janet Mills, who's turned a blind eye to Chinese organized crime, running amok with illegal cannabis grows throughout Maine. By the way, her brother has worked as a real estate attorney for some of those same illicit Chinese cannabis growers. So it's a real heated contest over there in the Democratic primary. Either way, I think Senator Collins, she's going to have a tough fight on her hands. She's always done well in Maine elections, though. I think she was, by polling, supposed to lose her last fight in 2020 by 6 points, and she ended up winning by 4 or 5. I think she's got the reputation, the money, the momentum to win this. And Jesse, I know she takes a lot of crap for being a moderate down in Washington, D.C., but she has been as stalwart as you could possibly be against Chinese communism-backed drug cartels operating in this state. And she's taken it very seriously. She's questioned intelligence heads about it. And she's really made a difference in the fight against Chinese criminal groups operating in Maine. So she's going to have the support of a lot of Mainers from the conservative part of the state.
Yeah, I give her a lot more excuses than I give some dork from a totally red state. Steve, thank you, brother. Wonderful. Come back soon. All right, speaking of a corrupt state, let's talk about California, that Palisades fire. Let's talk about your cell phone. How much are you paying every month? I want you to think about it. I know they probably text you your bill. How much? You know the average family saves $1,000 a year when they switch to Pure Talk? It's not just that Pure Talk is the patriotic cell phone carrier run by a Vietnam veteran. Save money. If you don't have any other motivation to switch, how about money? Pure Talk, when I switched from T-Mobile, we have 4 lines in my house. My bill got cut in half. In half, clean into it. I thought they screwed up when I first got my bill. puretalk.com/JesseTV. We'll be back. I've always thought people losing their homes is heartbreaking. And more than just for the basic reasons, right? The financial, the everything else. It's just so sad to lose all your stuff and then you got to start over and re-freaking build. And I still think about those people who lost everything in the Palisades fire in California and the dirty freaking commies who run that place, and now they're screwing everybody over, and it fills me up with rage. And I don't even live there. But Joel does. Joining me now, Joel Pollack, opinion editor of the California Post. Joel, before we get into what's going on now, why don't you recap it for us? What have you been through? What have your neighbors been through?
Well, I'm one of the lucky ones. My house survived. It's currently being repaired because it was damaged by the fire. But the fire only got to our fence and did not actually get into the house. I was able to get into the Pacific Palisades fire zone during the fire, and I put out the fire on my fence with buckets of water. We had no running water at that stage. There were no fire hydrants either, but I was able to get some water from the gutter. And so we put out the fire on the periphery of my property. We put out my neighbor's trees, which had caught on fire, which could have burnt his house, my house. So I managed to save the house, but it's been an incredibly long process trying to fix it. And then probably about 75% of my neighborhood burnt down. And again, that's not even the worst. I mean, there are neighbors in other parts of Pacific Palisades who lost everything, and everyone around them lost everything. And it's been a real struggle. I was in a meeting with Lee Zeldin and Kelly Loeffler of the Small Business Administration, Lee Zeldin, of course, of the EPA. And we were sitting there with residents, and there are some people in Pacific Palisades who are wealthy and famous and well-connected. And I listened to them talking about their experience, and I realized that these people who I would assume had more resources than I do were in some ways worse off than me, had not been able to make the same kind of progress that I've been able to make on my insurance claim or moving toward rebuilding and repair and so forth. So quite harrowing to hear how people have been reduced to poverty in some cases by this fire and by the massive expense that people have suddenly had to incur to deal with it. And the community is still strong, but it's a virtual community mostly people staying in touch through WhatsApp and through occasional gatherings, and people are determined to rebuild. But right now, the neighborhoods themselves are not coming back, and it's an incredibly slow process.
Okay, can you walk us through the reason that it's this slow, Joel? It's over a year ago. I understand insurance and permits and things like that take time, but to hear these stories, some people, I mean, they haven't even been able to break ground. What's the holdup?
So there are many different things, and it's a combination of things, really. So let's talk about the permitting issues. the city of Los Angeles, which is in charge in most of the area, has really struggled to make permitting more efficient. They're getting better at it in recent months, so that's good news. And I'm told that they surged some of their bureaucratic resources to Pacific Palisades. Maybe the impending election had something to do with that, or the fact that there's so little building going on in the rest of LA because of this so-called mansion tax, Measure ULA, which is supposed to raise money for affordable housing, but doesn't just tax high-end real estate. It also taxes commercial real estate, anything over $5 million. It's basically put residential construction to a halt. And so the city bureaucrats have more time to deal with Pacific Palisades, at least they have in the last few months. So permitting is going a little bit better. But generally speaking, in the first period after the fire, the bureaucracy didn't really know what to do differently. And it's only recently, literally in the last few days, that the city has formally and officially agreed to waive permitting fees for fire victims. So everything the city has done has taken time. I do think it's going to get better, but it really took a long time for the city to adjust to the new situation. That's one problem. The insurance problem, when President Trump came to Pacific Palisades 4 days after he was inaugurated, that's a problem I raised with him. I said that was the number one problem facing residents. That continues to be a problem for many people. And I've managed, fortunately, to negotiate a better relationship with my insurance adjuster than I had at the beginning, but I am on my fifth adjuster. That's not uncommon. The insurance companies rotate people in and out. They make the insured customers fill out these endless lists of their possessions, which takes forever and is very traumatic. They find a lot of delay tactics and lowball offers, and they just give people the runaround for so long. So the insurance companies, I think, generally speaking, have done a very poor job of honoring their obligations. And again, you can get lucky if you negotiate yourself into a better position, but there are people still stuck on square one with their insurance companies. And even if you do get the insurance payout, this comes to the third major obstacle. Construction costs have gone up so much in California as a result of environmental regulations, labor laws, the other consequences of some federal policies. The tariffs are generally okay for the economy. We haven't seen inflation rise, but they do hit certain construction components and immigration enforcement. We only want legal laborers, but the fact is a lot of construction workers, not the majority, but there are a significant number of construction workers who are in the country illegally. And the fact that some of those are no longer available has slowed things down and made it more expensive. And the insurance doesn't cover those costs. So people are suffering a shortfall. And you'd have a shortfall even without the tariffs and without the immigration enforcement, because construction simply has gone through the roof. And in fact, my wife bought more fire insurance the year before the fire because our insurance agent told us that when you bought this house, the construction costs were lower. Now, if your house, God forbid, burned down, and nobody thought that was even possible, but if it happened, you would struggle to repay to build the house, so you should buy more insurance. My wife did that. So we actually went into this fire with better insurance because we anticipated higher construction costs, but a lot of people didn't, and they were still looking at construction costs from 10, 15 years ago. It's just much more expensive, and people are getting quoted things like $1,000 a square foot. So you add all these things, the permitting problems, the insurance company foot dragging, and then just a higher cost of construction, the lack of affordability in California, which is partly a political consequence of Democratic policies and maybe a few Republican policies as well. That's why people are where they are today.
Joel, what do we know now? I know there was a lot of chatter after the fire, frankly, during the fire, but what do we know now about, well, water? Why didn't you have water coming out of your hose? Tell me about fire aid fraud. Are there nefarious things going on here?
These are great examples because there's some nefarious and bad behavior, but there are also some general problems that are the result perhaps not of bad intentions, but just of poor design. So let's take water, for example. President Trump has talked about how we need to move more water from the Pacific Northwest down to California, especially Southern California. That's true. And I asked him when I interviewed him in the Oval Office whether he wants to raise the height of the Shasta Dam. The Shasta Dam was originally designed almost 100 years ago to be several feet higher than it actually is. I think 18 feet higher than it actually is. 18 feet doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're talking about a massive lake behind a dam, that's a lot of water. And the farmers want Shasta Dam to be raised to its original designed height. And I asked Trump about that, and he said, yes, he is interested in doing that, but we don't know if the federal government is actually going to move forward with it. If Trump is serious about collecting more water in the north and bringing it to the south, he could do that. He's also correctly criticized the state for restricting water deliveries to save endangered species in the California Delta, specifically the Delta smelt. It's not clear that the science even is conclusive that it's water flow that is the problem with the smelt. There are other invasive predators that may be eating that fish that may be the real cause of the population decline. So I think Trump is right generally. But why didn't we have water in Pacific Palisades? We had a reservoir that was put in 50, 60 years ago specifically to fight against wildfires. Why was it empty? Well, it was empty because of a pre-existing federal regulation long before Trump that said the reservoir had to have a cover, and the cover had a crack. And so the local water authority emptied the reservoir to repair the crack. But they took their sweet time doing it. It was a very small job. They could have done it much more quickly. And in the meantime, they did not fill the reservoir in anticipation of fire season. So I put that down to local mismanagement plus bad federal regulations. But there's another problem with water, and this is a problem in all fires, not just this fire. The problem is the design of the system. When you have thousands of people turning on fire hydrants and garden hoses at the same time, you create a massive pressure differential that makes it very difficult for water to move through the system at the right pressure, even if you have enough water. So we could have had a full reservoir and still had a pressure problem. And the answer to that is to invest in this simple technology called the truck. Okay, the truck can carry a lot of water. That's how Rick Caruso, the billionaire developer, protected his property. He had mobile water trucks. Why don't we have a fleet of mobile water trucks? Why don't we have decentralized water tanks in different neighborhoods so that the pressure on the system as a whole can be alleviated? I mean, these are all things that are not that hard to do, but somehow nobody did. And that's a design problem, but it's also a policy problem in California. It means our state government and our local water department are not thinking about emergencies. So that's the water issue. The other issue you mentioned, fire aid. Again, fire aid, by the way, I was at the concert. It was one of the best concerts I've ever attended. So the music was fantastic. They raised $100 million. But the public that donated, in a sense, was misled because people were told that they'd be giving money to help fire victims. The implication being they were sending money that would go directly to the fire victims. That didn't happen. The money went to organizations that applied for grants from the Fire Aid Foundation that was created. And so many of these organizations were good, and some of them did, in fact, provide money directly to fire victims. But some of the organizations had nothing to do with the community and nothing to do with fire victims. One of them was an organization that registers Native Americans to vote. I looked up the census data. In all of Pacific Palisades, thousands of homes lost, we have 16 Native Americans, 1-6. And that's the same number of homeless people we had. I'm not trying to disparage Native Americans. I'm just saying, why would you give a grant to a Native American organization that doesn't have a population it's serving? There aren't that many Native Americans in Altadena either, in the Eaton fire on the other side of LA. So what I'm using that example to illustrate is that there were organizations who came in and just grabbed the money because that's what these organizations know how to do. There are people whose sole job is to find grants and write grant proposals and get money for their organizations. And that appears to be what happened with fire aid. So it's not like people stole money. And in fact, there was an outside investigation by a law firm that I think was credible, which said, well, we didn't find any wrongdoing. We didn't find any theft or fraud or embezzlement. No, but the system itself of grant giving was set up to fail. And I do think that the public was misled because it wasn't made clear to donors that the money is going to organizations and not going to the sympathetic victims that they met during some of the presentations at the Fire Aid concert. So, you know, we have these problems, but as Jillian Michaels points out in an opinion piece in today's California Post, if you know about these problems, you have to solve them. If you're the governor and you're the mayor and these problems exist, like the water pressure problem in the reservoir system, that doesn't mean you're not at fault for what happened during the fire. Why weren't you solving this problem? Other people solved it. Rick Caruso had the water trucks. Why did you not have a fleet of water trucks available? Why didn't you pre-position the fire engines where they had to be? There are all kinds of other questions. So, you're hearing that this is a complicated, complex issue, but fundamentally there is one theme that runs through it, and it's the lack of responsibility, the lack of accountability, the fact that there was no leadership on the ground. Karen Bass, our mayor, was in Africa. Gavin Newsom showed up and didn't have a solution for people who ran out of water. He said the locals will figure it out. Well, I figured it out with my bare hands, but I shouldn't have had to do that. So that's the situation we find ourselves in, and it's also the problem with the rebuilding effort. Finally, I'll just make this point. The fact that President Trump signed an executive order taking control of the permitting process, and the fact that he sent Lee Zeldin and Kelly Loeffler to Palisades to start working through these issues with the residents, that has brought new hope to people, because it shows that the federal government is stepping in, and it shows that President Trump is taking responsibility. It's not his backyard, okay? He's not going to win any votes in California. He's not running for re-election again, but there are no Republican votes in Pacific Palisades, and probably just as few in Altadena and Pasadena. But he has decided that this is a stain on our national reputation. We can't have this scar greeting people when they come for the World Cup or the Olympics in 3 years. We have to solve this problem. And he, to his great credit, has moved in and put his own name on the line. And that has changed things, because it has given people a sense of leadership, responsibility. Now there's accountability, goes straight to the White House. And I commend the president for doing it, not just because I want to see him do it, but he didn't have to do it. There's nothing for him to gain in it other than the satisfaction of knowing that you helped somebody. So that really is going to turn things around. That's our hope anyway.
Best of luck to you, Joel. I appreciate it, man. All right. We have Light in the Mood. You need to go to jessekelly.com and put in your email address, though. That's how we send you the book. We're just trying to send you a book. It's a free booklet, my little red book. jessekelly.com. We'll be back. All right, it's time to lighten the mood. Jerry Nadler didn't poop his pants today, but he did fall asleep.
Protect the American people and defend the rule of law above all. While our work is never done, we have made tremendous. In 2025, we saw the lowest murder rate in 125 years.
Sucks when you get woken up from a nap. I'll see you tomorrow.